you know, if you'll allow me, I think we should get an overview of this first of all.
Well, why don't we do that?
The overview was given by the one person, apart from Jesus Christ, who could give it to us, and that was the Blessed Virgin Mary. She did appear 6 times in 1917, and the last time was October 13, 1917, to 3 children and to 75,000 people. There was a miracle, the miracle of Fatima, at noontime at Fatima in Portugal. Fatima is a small little hamlet 75 miles from Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. Let's not delay for the moment. We can go back to it later on, the miracle of the sun, because it's the paramount miracle of the 20th century, perhaps the 5 centuries. But she did convey 3 secrets to those children and told them not to publish them yet, but to convey them to the local bishop. And one of those secrets has become the famous 3rd secret. Now that 3rd secret was conveyed or written on one sheet of paper to the Pope finally in the 1950s, about 1954 to 1957. The dates are always discussed by people. We know now the general lines of that secret. In fact, we know details. But the one outstanding thing was, Our Lady said that the Pope of 1960 had to open the envelope and read this secret and then do what she said. And the secret apparently, on the authority of the Pope, on the authority of Cardinal Ratzinger, on the authority of many people, said the following. It was an either-or. It was an ultimatum. The world is gone so far, by this time, the secret said, that unless Russia is converted by being consecrated to my Immaculate Heart, then faith will disappear from nations and continents. Cardinals and bishops and priests will fall like leaves into hell. In other words, it was an either-or. But if the Pope, in union with the bishops of the Church, in 1960, consecrates Russia, just Russia, the Soviet Union, the USSR, to my Immaculate Heart, then Russia will be converted and faith will be restored. Well, the sad aftermath of this is this, that Pope John the 23rd, whom I knew, did open the secret. And he opened it privately, first of all, in Castel Gandolfo in August 1959. And then in 1960, he opened it in the presence of several cardinals. Cardinal Bea was there, my cardinal, and with 2 Portuguese interpreters. And reading it and finding out that he was supposed to publicly, in union with all the bishops, and they were gathering into Rome, by the way, 2 years later, he was supposed to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and declare it to be a source of evil, but would be converted. He decided that Nikita Khrushchev, who was the strong man in Russia at that time, would take this as an act of war. Now, do you know, you may not know, that under Nikita Khrushchev, between 1958 and 1963, the most virulent anti-religious persecution took place in the Soviet Union.
It's interesting. I do have family in Russia. And what a lot of people don't know is that the persecution under Khrushchev was even more severe than that of Stalin.
Much more severe, much more severe. Well, so John said, I can't do that. I can't, because Nikita Khrushchev then would stop talking to me. At that time he was talking to John because John had one dream. He wanted observers from the Russian Orthodox Church to be present at his council. So at that meeting of cardinals, he took a sheet of paper and wrote on it, Questo, meaning the letter, non è per nostri tempi, is not for our times. Put it back in the box of the letter and closed it. He refused the mandate of Our Lady for his own good geopolitical reasons. I think it was short-sighted, and above all, I think he disobeyed Our Lady. But I'm a simple priest, I'm not Pope. That's my judgment. When Paul VI came in, he read the letter and decided to do nothing about it. John Paul I read the letter, but he had only 34 days to live. John Paul II read the letter at the beginning of his pontificate in 78, October 78, and put it aside, and he only took it up again in 1981 when he lay in Gemelli Hospital, wounded. And then he suddenly realized that indeed Our Lady had saved him on May 13 from the bullets of Mehmet Ali Abshah, the assassin. And he sent again for the letter and all the documents, and Lucia, Sister Lucia's writings. She's the only surviving child. And then he sent a message over to the Bishop of Leiria and to Lucia asking their advice about one point. And then in 1984, he consecrated the entire world.
Which is not what Our Lady asked for.
No. He made a special mention of Russia, saying the peoples, meaning the Russians, who still await their special consecration. In other words, the consecration hasn't been done. The point I'm making to you, Bernard, is that Our Lady's either-or is in action. She said, unless this is done, unless it's made public to all nations and all governments, all peoples, then faith will disappear from nations and continents. There will be huge catastrophes. Many people will die. But in the end, my Immaculate Heart will save people. So, if you want an overview of what's happened, take it like this. How come, or take an image, I think it was in 1966, suddenly all electric power disappeared from the northeast corner of the United States. The reservoir filled with juice, as we say in the United States, suddenly was emptied. Nobody has as yet explained how it all disappeared like that. Similarly, if you look at the church between 1965 and 1975, suddenly Catholicity disappeared. Suddenly. Priests left, nuns left, suddenly bizarre ceremonies took place, suddenly every practice like devotion to the Sacred Heart, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, confraternities, sodalities, St. Vincent de Paul work, pilgrimages, benedictions of the Blessed Sacrament, the habit of visiting the Blessed Sacrament, children's First Holy Communion, marriage, abortion, contraception, homosexuality, everything was turned upside down. Suddenly, the reservoir of Catholicism suddenly was sucked out, disappeared. And the only theological way you can look at that, theology, not historical, in the secular sense, is that God withdrew grace. God withdrew grace, sanctifying grace, without which you can't be Catholic. That's the overall view of what happened. And that's why Pope John Paul II in Fulda in 1980, when confronted with very fervent German Catholics, they said, Holy Father, why don't you renew the church? He said, I can't. Renewal is impossible until Our Lady comes. He was quoting the echo of that letter. And then he put his hand in his pocket and pulled out his rosary and said, that's your only weapon, the rosary. Pray, pray, and do nothing else but pray. So his mind from the very beginning was made up. I cannot renew my church. It can't be renewed because renewal is only possible through grace. You can't do it by organization. You can't do it by any human means. That is his attitude, and that's the explanation of it. Now, on the other hand, if you descend into details, you will find that, for instance, the big surrender on the part of the church. By the way, Bernard, when I say the church, I'm always talking about churchmen. There are two things to be distinguished. The church essentially is the mystical body of Jesus. What is that? The words people toss out. What does it mean? It means this, that there is a body, there is a group of people on earth and in heaven who are in the state of grace. And being in the state of grace, that is the church without spot or wrinkle. That belongs to Jesus completely. There is a body of people in purgatory who are being purged and cleansed by grace. And they also belong to the mystical body. That's the church suffering, the church militant, and the church triumphant. That's the church, essentially. It has a visible organization, an institutional organization called Roman Catholicism, based in Rome, the first bishop of Rome, the Pope, and then consisting of dioceses run by bishops, all of whom are supposed to be subject to the Pope, to obey the Petrine authority of the keys of St. Peter.
And we will be using the term church in line with the institutional church.
That's right. Whenever we speak about the church, we're talking about the institutional organization, not that pure and holy body of people. Nowadays, of course, the numbers who really belong there, that's another question. Nobody can say. But we can go back to that question at another moment in this talk. Now, the church itself, if you examine its progress, say since 1930, you'll find that the seedbed of all the errors that have plagued the church and do plague the church today began then. They began then. Now, the biggest plague, the biggest triumph of Satan is the destruction of the Mass. Because without the Mass, without valid priests saying valid masses, being ordained validly by validly ordained consecrated bishops. We have no Mass, we have no Blessed Sacrament, the presence of Jesus is wiped out.